Probably heard of Harlem Renaissance leaders like poet and writer Langston Hughes, playwright and filmmaker Zora Neale Hurston, or musician Louis Armstrong. But have you heard of historian Arturo Schomburg? And if you did you know this Harlem Renaissance leader was Puerto Rican?
Puerto Rico.
So picture this, you're a kid sitting in a classroom and your teacher lists off all the accomplishments and contributions that Europeans have had on society. So you raise your hand and ask, what about Black people? And your teacher responds, African people have no history. Well, that's what motivated Puerto Rican-born Arturo Schomburg to dedicate his life to documenting the many contributions of the African diaspora. Many credit him for setting the foundation for Black studies as we know it today. And if his name still isn't ringing a bell, no worries. You're about to learn today. But did slavery actually come to an end? Or did it just evolve? Have you heard of historian Arturo Schomburg? While women who have been central in the fight of our liberation are erased or overlooked. From merengue to rock and roll, your favorite musical genres are rooted in Blackness. But Black liberation isn't about some of us, it's about all of us. You can't tell nothing about us without us. He was a man of many talents. Arturo Schomburg made it his personal mission to account for all of the contributions and accomplishments made by African descendants worldwide. Arturo's passion to rectify history couldn't just be limited to one skill. He's a man who wore many hats throughout his life. He was a writer and publisher with a love for the written word in many forms. His first known article, entitled Is Haiti Decadent?, was published in 1904 in the Unique Advertiser. It was the first English language article he had written exploring Caribbean history and politics. But it wouldn't be the last time he unearthed African diasporic history. In 1911, he wrote Racial Integrity, a plea for the establishment of a chair of Negro history in our schools and colleges. In 1916, Schomburg moved on to concentrate on preserving poetry by African descendants. He published a bibliographical checklist of American Negro poetry, one of the first extensive collections of poetry by Black people. His essays continue to influence and educate a multitude of people, like his 1925 famous essay, The Negro Digs Up His Past, where Schomburg advocated for the importance of Black history studies. Schomburg wrote to educate fellow African descendants on where they came from and to create unity throughout the diaspora. He loved building community. So let's backtrack a bit. Schomburg, who was originally born in Santurce, Puerto Rico, moved to New York at the age of 17, where he immediately joined Partido Revolucionario Cubano, also known as the Cuban Revolutionary Party. As a Puerto Rican, Schomburg saw the kinship in being part of a party fighting for the independence of a Caribbean island like Cuba. He continued his organizing efforts to free both Cuba and Puerto Rico from Spain by co-founding the political organization Las Dos Antillas, the Two Antilles, in 1892. Arturo's community building didn't just stop at the Spanish-speaking African diaspora. He saw value in the collective power throughout the African diaspora, regardless of language. He joined forces with journalist John Edward Bruce in 1911 and founded the Negro Society for Historical Research, an institution built to support the scholarly efforts of all Black people, regardless of where they were born. See, both Arturo and John were born in different countries. John was born into slavery in Maryland, and Arturo was born in Puerto Rico, but both strive for higher learning and both experienced systemic anti-Black racism. Arturo, along with John, believed in the limitless power of Black people being at the forefront of writing their own histories. Like Arturo said, we need a collection or list of books written by our own men and women. We need the historian and philosopher to give us the story of our forefathers and let our soul and body with phosphorescent light brighten the chasm that separates us. He continued building community and standing in solidarity with African Americans. The Great Migration of 1918 had many African Americans migrating from the rural South to Harlem, New York. This became a hub for African-American artists and intellectuals like Countee Cullen, Claude McCade, and John E. Bruce, who Arturo later worked with, which birthed the new Negro movement, or as we now know it, the Harlem Renaissance. The Harlem Renaissance was not just for or by African Americans. Afro-Caribbeans like Hubert Harrion, Marcus Garvey, and yes, Arturo Schomburg also were fundamental in this social boom. It was a movement representative of the African diaspora and the solidarity amongst diverse Black communities that has been and continues to be critical. Many pioneers of the Harlem Renaissance movement use Arturo's work to further their own learnings. Biographer on Arturo Schomburg, Vanessa Valdez, recounts how Arturo's collection served as an invaluable research for such important writers and scholars as W.E.B. Du Bois, Carter G. Woodson, Elaine L. Locke, Zora Neale Hurston, and Langston Hughes. Speaking of people using his findings and writings, I forgot to mention one more talent Arturo had. He was a collector, so much so that Arturo Schomburg is responsible for the world's largest collection of books by or about Black people. Arturo traveled to Europe, Latin America, and all throughout the US, collecting a variety of items related to the African diaspora to preserve history that otherwise could be forgotten or purposefully omitted. He collected Black literature, newspapers, prints, slave narratives, artwork, you name it, he collected it. You can say he was quite the thrifter. He searched used furniture stores in Black neighborhoods, hoping he'd find treasures. And he sure did. Schomburg's collection included more than 5,000 books, 3,000 manuscripts, 2,000 etchings and paintings, and several thousand pamphlets. In 1926, the New York Public Library and Carnegie Corporation of New York acquired Arturo's collection for $10,000. Today, this purchase is valued at just over $140,000, but to be honest, you can't put a number on his collection. It's priceless. Arturo spent over 20 years collecting items connected to the African diaspora in order to celebrate the greatness in Black history. He found treasure in what others had overlooked. There's a reason why parents record a child's first steps, why diplomas are saved, or why we keep our childhood diaries. They're all pieces that tell the story of our journey on this earth. And those stories are passed on to the future generations so that they know where they came from. Sankofa. Arturo loved Black people so much he made it his life's work to make sure the stories of his people were told, so that Black folks weren't erased from history, so that Black folks could see themselves beyond the negative imagery in the public, and so that future generations could prosper from seeing where they came from.
Aren't you a Negro now?
No.
What are you?
I'm Black and beautiful.
Arturo Schomburg was someone who understood the importance of our stories, histories, being told by us. He knew that you can't tell nothing about us without us.